This is your introductory guide to Pokemon Showdown Generation 9 random battles. Playing a format with over 1,000 Pokemon can be kind of intimidating, so these are some broad tips and strategies that can help you regardless of your team composition. Before stepping into battle, this is so cheesy, oh my god. Before stepping into battle, you'll want to be familiar with the most useful commands in the Pokemon Showdown platform. The most important one is /Randbats and then the name of the Pokemon. This command gives you a list of all potential moves a Pokemon on your opponent's team could be assigned, which is clearly useful so you can know what moves they have access to, so you know what you should potentially be playing around. Another useful one is /weakness plus the name of the Pokemon, which gives you a list of all types that a Pokemon is strong or weak against or has an immunity to. You also have access to the commands rCalc and Randbats calc, which are commands that help you calculate damage that you would theoretically deal with a specific move. There are a lot of other commands, but those are the ones that are actually useful. The other ones are kind of garbo. It's also really important to know things like what different items do, what different abilities a Pokemon do, the moves that are in the game and what those moves do, their accuracies and power and their effects. And knowing as best you can the Pokemon type weaknesses chart is going to be super helpful. All this stuff you can kind of look up either in Google or in the Pokemon interface, but remember that in a showdown battle you are on the clock, and if you spend too much of your time looking up things, you're not gonna have enough time to be present strategizing in combat. So the more stuff you can memorize ahead of time, the more helpful it's gonna be for your actual battles. So how does Pokemon Showdown actually randomly generate your Pokemon team for Gen 9 battles? According to Smogan, Random Battles has a subjective leveling system that is vaguely based on tiering and random battle win rates. What does this really mean? Well, obviously there are Pokemon that are a lot stronger than other Pokemon. You may know about OU and Ubers and high tier Pokemon compared to lower tier Pokemon. In order to balance the difference between power levels, they adjust the levels of Pokemon within battles. So stronger tier Pokemon are actually going to be at a lower level than lower tier Pokemon to make the battles more balanced and fair and the teams more level set. So if you get a trash Pokemon, it's going to be higher level than a good Pokemon. If your opponent has like a legendary Pokemon, freaking Mewtwo, or Jirachi, or Arceus, and you're over there sitting with like you got like a freaking Lechonk. Oink alone! The evolution of Lechonk! It's gonna be okay. Lechonk is gonna carry your team. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. Every Pokemon has a neutral nature spread. They also all have exactly 504 equally spread EVs. Really the only exception are if a Pokemon has like Trick Room or something where it will have 0 EVs for speed. Pokemon on average also take and deal a little bit less damage than in constructed formats because Pokemon, their EVs aren't optimized towards their competencies and they don't always have the best moves. You might not get one shot as often in the same way as like a Gen 9 constructed format. Movesets are randomized, but they are pulled from that Pokemon's competitive pool of moves. So they're never gonna get garbage moves and they're always gonna have at least one stab move. You can also be confident that if your opponent uses a stab move against you, it's gonna be the only stab move in their pool as they try to give a diversity of different types of moves in a Pokemon's arsenal. Items are influenced based on what moves Pokemon get. This was the case in Gen 8 random battles. Pokemon with 2 or fewer attacks always got leftovers or Black Sludge if they were a poison type. Pokemon with 3 or more attacks always got Life Orb, and Pokemon with 4 attacks will get a choice item. Other items that can get assigned in specific situations are things like Assault Vest, Heavy Duty Boots, Focus Sash, and Weakness Policy. And then there are certain Pokemon that always get their signature item. So someone like Pikachu will always get Light Ball. Roles for your Pokemon. In Gen 9 random battles, there are 10 total roles that can be assigned to your Pokemon by the generator that have them fill a certain slot in your team. So the first role is Fast Attacker. A Fast Attacker is kind of what it sounds like. A lot of these are what they sound like. It's a Pokemon with very high speed that has access to strong attacking moves. So our example that we're using here is Talonflame, firefighting type Pokemon. Talonflame is a good fast attacker because it has access to moves like Brave Bird and Flare Blitz, which are both stab moves, right? Flare Blitz being a fire type, Brave Bird being a flying type. A Setup Sweeper is a Pokemon that has access to a stat enhancing move and then will stay in and ideally try to sweep as many Pokemon on the opponent's team as possible by recycling and reusing pretty strong moves. So something like Gyarados. Gyarados is a water flying type. You can see already has a pretty good attack. Gyarados is a nice setup sweeper because it has access to the move Dragon Dance. Dragon Dance is very useful in conjunction with moves like Waterfall and Earthquake. It can be very hard to take out sweepers once they're set up successfully. Sometimes you can even Swords Dance twice and it's almost impossible for your opponent to deal with that Pokemon once it's fully set up. Gyarados also usually has Intimidate, which is a very good ability too. Then we also have what's called a Wall Breaker, and a good example of this would be Cinderace. Wall Breakers are intended to take down an opponent's wall. So if your opponent has a very, very bulky Pokemon with a certain stat, these Pokemon are going to come in and try to clean them up. Cinderace is nice because it has a very high attack stat. So maybe your opponent has a very impressive special defensive wall, but maybe has a not so great defense. You would bring Cinderace in to try and chop through that Pokemon. Cinderace gets access to very good moves, Pyro Ball and High Jump Kick. It comes in, it does a lot of damage, it breaks walls. It's kind of similar to a fast attacker, if I'm being honest, but wall breakers don't necessarily need to be fast. They just need to be strong. So sometimes these wall breakers are even more powerful than fast attackers. You'll notice sometimes these Pokemon can fill different roles or blend into multiple roles. By the way, guys, if you're watching the video and it's at all helpful for you, consider subscribing to the channel. I'd appreciate it a lot, and we have other Pokemon Showdown guides you can definitely check out. Also, I recorded the second half of this video after doing some additional research because I wanted to make sure I was giving you guys the most accurate data possible. The next type of Pokemon we have is a Tera Blast user. These are Pokemon that use the move Tera Blast. Tera Blast is a normal type move, 80 power, 100 accuracy, and is unique because it changes based on what your Pokemon's Tera type is once it terrestrializes. Once it terrestrializes. So a good example of a Pokemon that uses Tera Blast is Dragonite. Dragonite standard Dragon Flying will get a stab move of at least one of those types, and then when it Tera types to either counter something or predict an attack or switch what type it wants to use to attack with, Tera Blast will actually change types to match Dragonite's new type. You can also say the same thing for something like Landorus, which is another Tera Blast user. These Tera Blast users are very strong. Both of these actually have very high attack stats, but what's interesting about Tera Blast is it'll pick the stat that is stronger. So if your Pokemon is an attacker, it'll use its attack stat. If it's a special attacker, it's a special attack stat. The next role is Bulky Attacker. Now, I initially actually had Togepex as our bulky attacker to look at, but I was corrected in that Togepex is probably more of a bulky defensive Pokemon. We'll come back to Togepex in a bit, but a bulky attacker could be more something like Groudon. Groudon is a Pokemon that has a good attack stat, but also usually has one of its two defensive stats. As an example here, Groudon has a very high defensive stat, but can also deal a relatively high amount of damage. It's not so much of a special defender, but it's very good if you need a wall against a strong attacking Pokemon, and something that can also hit back a decent amount. Typically, Groudon is going to get strong attacks like Stone Edge and Lava Pume, and it may have some sort of status type things like Thunder Wave. What's interesting about Groudon is Groudon can also fulfill other types of roles, such as the next role, which is a bulky setup. A bulky setup Pokemon is a Pokemon that can take a lot of damage while using setup moves such as Swords Dance or Shell Smash or Dragon Dance or Calm Mind or any of those types of things, and get in position to sweep or take out some of your opponent's Pokemon. So Groudon as a bulky setup could have something like Swords Dance and other similar types of attacks and be a threat that's very hard for your opponent to deal with. At one point, you also had the Pokemon Ferrothorn, which was a very good setup mom, but they removed that from Ranbats. But there are Pokemon like Garganacl, which is a bulky setup mon. Garganacl boasts a very high defense stat and usually gets the move Curse. It can chunk really hard with stuff like Earthquake and Stone Edge, and then it also gets the move Recover to recuperate its health, which is very frustrating to deal with. Garganacl can also be a bulky setup Pokemon as well as a bulky support Pokemon. It really depends on what moves it's assigned. Then we have a role called Fast Bulky Setup. It's like a bulky setup, but fast. Mind blown. Now, obviously, Pokemon can't be decked out in every single stat. You can't be fast and also strong and also bulky. So there are a little bit of compromises made in the defense and attack department to add some speed. So you're just a little bit quicker than what a normal bulky setup would be, which are slightly more powerful, but not as quick. Usually they lack in speed. This is a little more well-rounded of a Pokemon that has a way they can set up and still take a good chunk of damage. So an example of this could be something like Espathra. Espathra has a very reasonable special attacking stat, as well as good speed, and then a decent amount of HP to take a chunk of damage. It also only has 3 weaknesses, Bug, Ghost, Dark, so oftentimes the opponent might need to switch out in order to deal with it. Now, Espathra can use the move Calm Mind to really bulk up its special defense and make it stronger. And then we'll get things like Stored Power or Dazzling Gleam to really punch at the opponent once it's set up. And then it can have things like Protect or Roost to kind of stall as it's chunking away at damage and setting up. Now, a good example of a physical attacker that would meet the requirement of a fast bulky setup is Annihilate. Now, Annihilate has a very nice attack stat combined with good speed, and then its HP is pretty juicy as well, so it can take a beating and also dish out a good amount of damage once it is set up. Annihilate specifically is going to use something like Bulk Up to boost its attack, and then it's going to start beating in with something like Drain Punch, and it's got like the Resto Chesto strat if you need to recover health and stall a little bit longer. By the way, I absolutely love the design of Annihilate. This Pokemon's such a baller. That's what I looked like during my emo phase in high school. And then we have bulky supports. And what better one to start with than the All-Star, a bulky support since all the way back in Gen 2, Blissey. Blissey can tank most attacks and will completely clutch against any special attacking Pokemon. It also only has one weakness in fighting type, so it's very, very useful. And then it has a great move set. It usually gets Thunder Wave as a status effect. It gets Soft Boiled as its recovery move, and then a move like Seismic Toss or Stealth Rock to do some damage. There's also bulky supports that can tank physical attacks as well, and we can look no further than Toxapex. Toxapex is a bit more flexible than Blissey in that it has both very nice defense and special defense stats. It does not have as much HP, so it's not as strong against special attacking units as Blissey is, but it's more of a well-rounded Pokemon. It does have a few more weaknesses, but also a lot more resistances, and the moveset for this is also going to include a healing move. In this case, it's Recover, and all Pokemon that are bulky supports are going to have some sort of recovery moves, which is required. The status move of choice for Toxapex is either something like Toxic or Toxic Spice, hence Toxapex. Toxic. And then its attacking move is going to be the Stab Liquidation. Then we have what's called a fast support, whose objective is to come in as a speedy Pokemon that can support the team in some way. Pretty self-explanatory. We will take a look at the very useful Electrode for this one. Swapping in an Electrode can be very useful because of its very strong speed effect, and it can use something like Stab Thunderbolt to take out maybe an annoying water or flying type Pokemon. It also has use in stalling with things like Leech Seed and Substitute to drain out an opponent's Pokemon over time, and it even gets the coverage move Giga Drain. This Pokemon is fast and very flexible in terms of the utility it has. And then finally we have what's called the AV Pivot, standing for Assault Vest Pivot. In this case, we're looking at the fan favorite, Slowking. A Pokemon that's an AV Pivot always gets Assault Vest because it has no status moves. It has 4 attacking moves. These Pokemon don't always necessarily have super impressive stats, but they're meant to be this Pokemon that sort of fills in the gaps on your team. So Slowking will be able to deal with a diverse pool of threats with its moves such as Fire Blast, Ice Beam, Psy Shock, or Future Sight, and Sludge Bomb. And Pokemon like this can be very challenging to play against because they have attacks that are good against most opponents' Pokemon. And the one other thing that's really important to mention for Gen 9 is Terrestrialization. Generation 8 had Dynamaxing, and now Generation 9 introduces Tera Types. Terrestrialization lets your Pokemon transform in the middle of battle from its current typing into its Tera type, which adds an entire new layer of depth to Gen 9 battles. Tera typing can be super useful for things such as setting up stab moves for that Tera type, setting up your Tera Blast users, or resisting a predicted attack you know your opponent is going to use. With that being said, if you're looking for other people to play Pokemon Showdown with, make sure you join our Discord. And if you like Pokemon Showdown guide content, you'd probably enjoy these other videos as well. Subscribe if you like Pokemon, and have a great day.